It all started with a series of disappearances. Hikers and campers gone without a trace. The woods, once my sanctuary, had become a realm of dread, duty called, and armed with nothing but a flashlight and a gnawing unease, I plunged into the abyss. The trail was barely visible, obscured by the overgrowth that had swallowed it. The trees loomed over me, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and grab at my ankles. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. I pushed forward, determined to find some answers. That's when I heard it, a faint moaning coming from somewhere up ahead. I quickened my pace, my heart beating faster with every step. As I rounded a bend in the trail, the source of the moaning came into view. A woman lay crumpled on the ground, her clothes torn and bloodied. I rushed to her side, my hands shaking as I checked for a pulse. To my relief, she was still alive, but barely. Her eyes fluttered open, and she managed to gasp out a few words before slipping into unconsciousness again. "They took us. The creatures. They're not human." My blood ran cold at her words. I knew all too well the legends of the creatures that lurked in these woods, creatures that had been brought to life by the fear and dread of those who dared to tread too far into their territory. I lifted the woman onto my shoulders, determined to get her to safety. As I carried her through the dark forest, my mind raced with questions. Who had taken her? And why? The answer came to me soon enough. A group of men, armed with guns and knives, stepped out of the shadows, blocking my path. The woman, still unconscious, slumped against my back. One of the men stepped forward, a sneer on his face. "Hand her over, and we might let you live." I didn't have time to think. Instinct took over, and I lunged at them, using all my strength to fend them off. But it was no use. They were too many and too well armed. I felt a sharp pain in my side as one of them plunged his knife into me. I collapsed to the ground, the weight of the woman on top of me. The men laughed, kicking me in the ribs and taunting me as they dragged the woman away. I watched helplessly as they disappeared into the darkness, their cruel laughs echoing through the trees. Blood seeped from my wound, staining the forest floor. I knew I was going to die, but something inside me refused to give up, to let those men get away with what they had done. With a surge of energy, I lifted myself up, gritting my teeth against the pain. I had to follow them, had to save the woman. The trail of blood they left behind was my guide. I stumbled forward, my vision growing blurry from loss of blood, but I refused to give up. Finally, I saw them. They had set up camp in a clearing, a fire blazing in the center. The woman was tied to a tree, her eyes closed. The men were standing around the fire, drinking and laughing, unaware of my presence. I crept closer, my hand reaching for the knife still lodged in my side. It hurt to move, but I pushed past the pain and focused on the task at hand. But I wouldn't get my chance. As I steeled myself for the attack, a horrid screech shattered the silence. My would-be victims instantly turned in my direction, and for a moment I was sure I'd been seen. I watched helplessly as something tore them to shreds. It all happened so fast, the last of them barely had time to flee. But he was bleeding profusely, and didn't make it far before the creature seized upon him, his screams of pain and anguish quickly turning to wet crunching and gurgling. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The creature was unlike anything I'd ever encountered before. It was massive, covered in fur, with razor-sharp teeth and claws. Its eyes glowed in the firelight, reflecting a primal intelligence that sent shivers down my spine. But as terrifying as it was to behold, it didn't seem to have any interest in me. Instead, it prowled around the campsite, sniffing at the corpses and licking up the blood. And then it turned its attention to the woman, her screams growing more frantic. I'd like to say I had the guts to do the right thing in that moment, to charge out in a suicidal effort to free her before the inevitable happened. But I didn't. I just stayed where I was, frozen in terror as whatever this thing was feasted to its satisfaction and wandered back into the endless forest as suddenly as it had appeared. I never go back there anymore, and for what it's worth, I try to steer others clear too. I guess that's why I'm telling you now. Whatever you do, stay on the trail and never stay out after dark, or else you just might be another one I can't save. All right, that should do it, I said, slamming the rear door of my friend's Jeep. The four of us had planned the trip into the mountains for months. We were all college seniors and had been friends since our freshman year. This trip was supposed to be our last hurrah before we graduated and went our separate ways. As I climbed into the back seat, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and anticipation. I'd always loved the outdoors, but I had never been this far into the mountains before. The air was crisp and cool, and the towering trees around us seemed to stretch up towards the sky. My friend, Tom, was driving and he turned the ignition, revving the engine. "Let's do this," he exclaimed, a big smile on his face. As we made our way up the winding mountain road, the sun began to set behind us, casting long shadows across the landscape. We drove for hours, stopping occasionally to take in the breathtaking views and snap some photos. Eventually, we arrived at our campsite, a small clearing nestled in the heart of the forest. We quickly set up our tents and built a fire, the flames casting a warm glow around us as we sat around it, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. "You guys know we shouldn't be camping out here, right?" Tom announced suddenly. "Why's that? This was your idea, genius," I ribbed. "Well," Tom smiled, "let me tell you, this land is supposedly cursed. Legend has it that a group of settlers came here years ago and they were never seen again. They say their spirits roam these woods at night, seeking vengeance for their untimely demise." I rolled my eyes. "Tom, come on. You don't honestly believe in ghosts, do you?" "Right." Tom shrugged. "I don't know what to believe, man, but I heard some weird noises last night. It sounded like someone was walking around our campsite." I shook my head. "Probably just a raccoon or something." "Or what?" I scoffed. "Was your plan to bring us out here and watch for ghosts?" "Laugh all you like," Tom retorted, "but keep an eye out. All I'm saying." I rolled my eyes, but as the night wore on, I began to feel uneasy. The woods were eerily silent, and there was a strange energy in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone out here. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream shattered the stillness of the night. We all jumped to our feet, our hearts pounding with fear. "What the hell was that?" I exclaimed, looking around frantically. My eyes met Tom's, his face pale with terror and excitement. "Come on," he said. "I told you, let's check it out." Tom started from his seat. "No way," said Sarah. "I'm not going out into the woods at night to find some wild animal." "That was no animal," Tom said. "We could have the chance to see something really, truly supernatural here, shouldn't we? I don't know, document this." I rolled my eyes again, but part of me was curious. I'd always been fascinated by the supernatural and the unexplained. But the rational part of me knew better than to go traipsing off into the woods at night, chasing after some unknown creature or apparition. "I don't know, Tom," I said, trying to reason with him. "It could be dangerous. We don't even know what we're dealing with here." "Come on," he urged. "We have to at least try. Imagine the stories we could tell if we find something." I sighed, feeling the peer pressure mounting. "Fine," I relented, "but we stick together and we're careful." And we turned back at the first sign of trouble. Tom's face broke into a grin. "That's the spirit," he exclaimed. We grabbed a few flashlights and made our way out of the clearing and into the dense forest. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers in the darkness. Every rustle of leaves made me jump, and I felt as if we were being watched. As we walked, I noticed that the forest was changing, becoming more twisted and gnarled. The trees looked like they had been dead for centuries, and the air grew colder and thicker around us. "Now, Tom, are you sure about this?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Yeah, man. We're just getting started," he replied, his eyes darting around eagerly. Suddenly, we heard another scream, this time closer. It sounded human, and it sent chills down my spine. "Hello?" Sarah called out, her voice shaking. "Is anyone there?" There was no answer, only the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. We followed the noise, our flashlights bobbing up and down in the darkness. As we rounded a corner, we saw it, a figure standing in the distance, silhouetted by the moonlight. It was tall and slender, with long, spindly limbs and skin as white as snow. Its eyes were glowing red, and it stood motionless, watching us. "Guys, what is that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom was the first to step forward, his curiosity getting the better of him. "I don't know, but let's go closer and find out." I hesitated. But my curiosity got the best of me, and I followed them as we approached the strange figure. As we got closer, we realized it was a woman, or at least it had once been a woman. Her skin was stretched tight over her bones, and her eyes were sunk deep into her skull. Her hair was long and matted, and she wore a white dress that was torn and stained with blood. "Are you okay?" Tom asked tentatively, his voice shaking. The woman didn't move, but her eyes locked onto us, and she let out a low guttural growl. Suddenly she lunged forward, her body contorting in unnatural ways as she moved towards us. We all screamed and stepped back, but she was too fast. Before we knew it, she was upon us, her long, bony fingers wrapped around our throats. We struggled and fought, but we were no match for her. She was too strong, too powerful. As everything went black, I couldn't help but wonder if Tom had been right. Were there really supernatural forces at work in these woods? Or was this just a case of our overactive imaginations getting the best of us? Either way, it was too late now. We were trapped, at the mercy of something far beyond our understanding. As a park ranger, I know these caves like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. Sometimes people go missing. Hikers lose their way or visitors vanish from the trails. Some are found, but others... Still, nothing I'd experienced in all my years could have prepared me for this nightmare. I was responding to reports of an injured hiker near the mouth of one of the caves. As I approached the cave, I noticed that the entrance was different. The rocks that usually block the entrance had been moved. The darkness inside seemed to stretch out forever. I hesitated for a moment before taking a deep breath and stepping inside. The air inside was musty and damp. My flashlight barely made a dent in the darkness. I could hear the sound of dripping water, and my footsteps echoed eerily. I walked for what felt like hours, checking every nook and cranny for the hiker. As I was about to turn back, I heard a faint cry for help. I followed the sound and found the hiker, bloodied and crawling on the ground. He was in bad shape, so I immediately called for backup. As I waited for help to arrive, I noticed something moving in the shadows. I shone my flashlight in its direction and saw a pair of glowing eyes. At first, I thought it was a wild animal, but as it stepped closer, I realized it was something far more sinister. The creature was humanoid in shape, but its skin was black and scaly, with eyes that glowed like embers. Its mouth was full of razor-sharp teeth that gleamed in the dim light. It looked at me hungrily, as if I was its next meal. I tried to back away slowly, but the creature lunged at me with incredible speed. I barely had time to dodge its attack. I drew my gun and fired, but the creature seemed unfazed. It charged at me again, its claws slashing through the air. I knew I had to get out of there, but the hiker was still lying on the ground, unable to move. I had to protect him. I grabbed a nearby rock and hurled it at the creature, hoping to distract it. To my surprise, the creature recoiled and hissed, giving me just enough time to grab the hiker and drag him toward the exit. The creature followed us, its glowing eyes fixed on me as we stumbled through the darkness. I could hear its heavy breaths and the sound of its claws scraping against the cave floor. I knew we were running out of time. We burst out of the cave and into the fresh air, but the creature was still hot on our heels. I pushed the hiker towards safety and turned to face the creature, still brandishing my gun. The creature let out a deafening roar and charged at me with a renewed ferocity. I fired my gun again and again, but it seemed to have no effect on the creature. It was like shooting at a brick wall. The creature lunged at me, its jaws wide open, ready to tear me apart. In a moment of desperation, I remembered the rock that had stunned the creature in the cave. I scanned the ground for something to use as a weapon and saw a large stick. I grabbed it and swung with all my might, connecting with the creature's head. It let out a piercing cry and stumbled back, giving me an opening to escape. I didn't look back as I ran, heart pounding in my chest. I heard the creature's furious roars and the cries of the unfortunate hiker behind me, but I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my truck. Shaking uncontrollably, I grasped the steering wheel to brace myself as I fumbled with my keys in the ignition. Finally, turning it over, I put the pedal to the floor and never looked back. I thought I'd made it. I thought that was the last I'd see of that thing, but I was wrong. That creature haunted my dreams, and I could hear its snarls and roars in my head. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there waiting for its next victim. It wasn't until I received a call from my fellow rangers that I realized my worst fears were true. There had been another attack. This time, it was a group of young hikers who had ventured too far into the caves. The creature had descended upon them, tearing them apart with its razor-sharp claws and teeth. By the time my colleagues arrived, it was too late. The group was decimated, their bodies torn to shreds. I was wrong. The creature had caught the scent of my fear, and it was not about to let me get away so easily. No matter where I go, I know I have to go back to that place every day, to its domain. The others don't believe me. They say it's just wild animals and I dare not press the issue, but one of these days I wouldn't be able to avoid it any longer. I just knew it. Sure enough, that night, as I lay in my bed, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. I could hear movement outside, but when I looked out the window, I saw nothing. I tried to shake off the feeling and go back to sleep, but I couldn't. My mind kept replaying the events of that horrible day in the cave. Suddenly, I heard a noise coming from the living room. I slowly got out of bed, heart racing, and grabbed my gun. I made my way to the living room, gun at the ready, but when I switched on the light, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. I dismissed it as my imagination and was about to turn back to my bedroom when I heard a sound coming from the kitchen. I crept toward the kitchen, heart pounding, my gun outstretched in front of me. As I approached the kitchen, I could see a shadowy figure moving in the darkness. My hand trembled as I aimed my gun at the figure, ready to fire if necessary. As the figure stepped into the light, my blood ran cold. It was the creature from the cave, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly intensity. I fired my gun, but the creature was too quick. It dodged my bullets effortlessly and lunged at me with frightening speed. Its claws tore through my flesh, and I screamed in agony as I fell to the ground. The creature's jaws snapped at me inches from my face, but I managed to grab the nearby kitchen knife and plunge it into its side. The creature howled in pain and retreated, disappearing into the night. I was left bleeding and gasping for breath, staring at the knife still clutched in my hand. I knew this wasn't over. The creature was still out there waiting for its next opportunity to strike, and I was now a part of its game. I loved my brother, Matt. All brothers do, I suppose. But I still remember his smile the last time I saw him. The last time anyone did, for that matter. That was 7 years ago. He was always out there. Said he knew there was something in those woods. Something evil. It takes people that go a little too far off the beaten path. Of course, we all wrote it off as nonsense, but that didn't stop me from retracing Matt's last known whereabouts every year. Every year I would go back to that place where my brother disappeared. It was like a pilgrimage for me, a way to keep him alive in my memory. As I walked through the dense trees, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to him. Had he stumbled across something he shouldn't have? Was he attacked by an animal? Or was it something more sinister than that? I'd come prepared this year with extra supplies and a GPS tracker. I wasn't going to make the same mistakes that Matt did. I was going to find out what happened to him, no matter what it took. As I walked deeper and deeper into the woods, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was like I was being watched. Suddenly I heard a twig snap behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. My heart was racing as I pressed on. I had to find out what happened to my brother. As the sun began to set, I stumbled upon an old cabin. It was in terrible shape, with the roof caving in and the walls covered in moss, but it was the only shelter I had for the night. I cautiously stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The cabin was pitch black, but I could hear something moving around inside. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking with fear. As the beam of light hit the walls, I saw something that made me freeze in terror. There were claw marks etched into the wood, as if something had tried to break in. And then I heard it again, a low growling sound coming from the darkness. I slowly began to back away, but then I heard something that made me stop. It was a whisper, a voice that sounded like my brother's. "Help me, please," it said. I turned around, my flashlight illuminating the figure standing in front of me. It was Matt, but he wasn't the same person I remembered. His skin was pale, his eyes were glazed over, and his clothes were tattered and torn. I couldn't believe my eyes. "Matt, is that really you?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. He didn't answer, but instead took a step closer to me. His eyes narrowed, and I could see a savage hunger in them. I realized then that this wasn't my brother. This was something else entirely, something that had taken over his body. I tried to back away slowly, but he lunged forward, his hands outstretched and his teeth bared. I screamed and ran out of the cabin as fast as I could. I could hear him chasing me, his inhuman growls echoing through the forest. I wasn't sure how long I ran for, but eventually I found a stream. I plunged into the water, hoping to lose whatever was chasing me. I stayed in the water for what felt like hours, my body shivering from the cold. Finally, I mustered up enough courage to climb out and continue my journey. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I turned around, I saw nothing but darkness and trees. I realized then that I had to find a way out of the woods and fast. As the dawn broke, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center of it stood an old tree. It was unlike any tree I had ever seen before. The bark was black and twisted, and the branches hung low, blocking out the sunlight. I felt drawn to it, as if it was calling out to me. As I stepped closer, I saw something etched into the bark. It was a symbol I had never seen before, but it was pulsating with an eerie energy. The stench of rotten flesh and sulfur permeated the air around the tree. The air felt heavy and damp. There was a tangy, bitter smell in the air, an odor of decay and death about it, though very faint. I knew then that this was the source of the evil that my brother had warned me about. And as I stood there staring at the symbol, I could feel something inside of me stirring. It was like a dark force was calling out to me, tempting me, and I knew that if I didn't get out of there soon, I would be lost forever. But just as I turned to run, something grabbed me from behind. I tried to scream, but a cold hand clamped over my mouth, muffling my cries for help. I struggled against my attacker, but it was no use. They were too strong. The world began to spin as I was lifted off my feet and carried deeper into the woods. I caught a glimpse of my captor's face, and I knew then that it was my brother. But he was no longer the Matt I had known and loved. He was a monster, a vessel for the evil that lurked inside those woods. I don't know how long I was held captive, but it felt like an eternity. In that darkness, I was subjected to unspeakable horrors that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I was beaten, starved, and forced to endure all manner of physical and psychological abuse. But worst of all was the feeling of utter hopelessness that consumed me. I was trapped in that place with no way out. But one day, I woke up to find that my captor was gone. I don't know how or why, but I didn't care. I knew that this was my chance to escape. I stumbled out of the cabin, my body weak and trembling. But as I made my way through the woods, I could feel something inside of me changing. It was like the darkness had taken root in my soul, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it off. Ever since then, I'm sick. There's something wrong, and the doctors don't know what it is. There's no treatment for my symptoms, not for the sleepwalking, the fever dreams, or the strange necrosis that's slowly eating me from the inside. They can't tell me whether I'll ever get better, or how much time I might have left before it's too late. The darkness that had taken over my brother's body had somehow seeped into mine, corrupting me from the inside out. But I fear that it may be too late for me. The necrosis continues to spread, and I can feel my mind slipping away. Sometimes I wonder if it's all in my head, if the darkness is nothing more than a figment of my imagination. But then I see the marks on my body, the scars that refuse to heal, and I know that it's as real as the look in my brother's eyes the night he shared his curse with me. Have you ever felt the forest staring back at you? Not the rustling leaves or the nocturnal sounds, but a presence, an unseen entity that breathes with the trees and whispers through the shadows. I've spent decades patrolling these woods as a park ranger, a witness to nature's beauty and brutality. But what I encountered out there, lurking beneath the canopy, made me question everything I thought I knew. It was late October, the trees were adorned in hues of crimson and gold, and the air held a biting chill. I received a distress call from a group of hikers who claimed they were lost in the woods. My gut told me something was off, a primal instinct that stirred unease within me. Ignoring protocol, I ventured alone into the maze of ancient trees, their twisted branches casting elongated shadows. As I navigated the labyrinthine trails, the silence became suffocating. No bird calls, no rustling leaves, just an eerie hush that clung to the air. I felt as though the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. I pushed forward, my senses on high alert, my hand resting on the grip of my revolver. That's when I saw her. A woman standing in the middle of the trail, her long hair obscuring her face. She was dressed in a flowing white gown that seemed to glow in the dim light filtering through the trees. but there was something about her that made my skin crawl. "Mom, are you lost?" I called out, my voice echoing through the forest. No answer. I took a few cautious steps forward, my heart pounding against my chest. The woman remained still, her face still obscured by her hair. As I got closer, I could see that her skin was deathly pale, almost translucent. "Ma'am, I'm a park ranger. Are you okay?" Suddenly, the woman's head snapped up, her hair falling away from her face. Her eyes were black as coal, and her lips twisted into a sinister smile. I gasped, taking a step back as she started to move towards me with an inhuman grace. I raised my gun, but I knew it would be useless against this otherworldly creature. The woman stopped, still grinning wickedly. "You shouldn't have come here," she hissed, her voice laced with a hint of amusement. "This forest belongs to us now." "Us?" The word echoed through my mind, sending shivers down my spine. I'd heard stories of supernatural beings inhabiting the woods, but I never believed them. Until now. I watched in horror as the woman transformed before my very eyes. Her skin rippled, bones cracking as she grew taller and her limbs elongated. Wings unfurled from her back, translucent and iridescent, like those of a dragonfly. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and her mouth stretched impossibly wide to reveal rows of glistening, razor-sharp teeth. I stumbled backwards, tripping over a tree root and hitting the ground hard. The creature loomed over me as she regarded me with soulless black eyes. Before I could react, she lunged at me, her teeth sinking into my shoulder. I screamed, unable to comprehend the pain that tore through me. She pulled away, blood dripping from her jaws as she laughed, a sound that echoed through the forest like a death knell. I collapsed in shock, clutching my wound and rolling to my side. I searched frantically, but I was alone again, thankfully. Or not. I tried to radio for help and got nothing but static. My heart dropped as I realized I was going to die out here, alone and forgotten, just another casualty in this godforsaken forest. My attacker's laughter echoed through the trees around me. That's when I realized I was still losing blood, and fast. The pain was slowly subsiding, my body weakening with each passing moment. Even if I wanted to get up and run, I wouldn't make it far. I was about to close my eyes for the last time when I heard a sound in the distance. It was faint, but unmistakable, a child's laughter. I turned my head, and through the haze, I could see a little boy standing in the middle of the trail, perhaps 100 feet away. He looked to be about 8 years old, with messy brown hair and a tattered shirt. He stared at me with eyes the color of the sky, and I recognized him instantly. My own son, who had died in a car accident years ago. "Chris," I whispered, "is that really you?" I felt a spark of hope ignite in my chest. "Do you know the way out of here?" I asked frantically. The boy just stared back at me from the safety of the tree line, those same pools of unnatural darkness where his eyes should have been. "Why did you kill me, Daddy?" The boy's voice reverberated as though he were whispering directly into my ear. I froze, my mind reeling as I tried to process what was happening. "What are you talking about?" I asked the boy, my voice trembling. "You heard me. You killed me in the car accident, remember? I told you not to drink and drive, but you did it anyway. You shouldn't have done that, Daddy. You promised you wouldn't leave me." The boy's voice was tinged with anger, the same way mine would be if I were scolding him. I remembered that night all too clearly. I had been a little tipsy, but I could still drive. But in my inebriated state, I made a stupid decision to drive over the speed limit. A decision I would have never made if my son hadn't been with me. A decision that cost him his life. "You killed me, Daddy. Now we're both trapped here in this forest, and we will never get out." I awoke in the hospital, apparently for the second time. The doctor said I had to be restrained and sedated the first time because I woke up crying, screaming my son's name over and over. I tried to make sense of what happened. By the time my colleagues found me near the trail, I'd nearly bled out. It was a miracle I survived, but I couldn't forget the words my son said to me even now, all these years later. Despite my injuries and regardless of the knowledge it couldn't really have been him, I'm going back there tonight. If I could just see him, maybe talk to him one more time, it will be worth it no matter what happens to me.
Woo!